No.
No.
I'll speak to my agent.
You'd have done your hair, wouldn't you, if you'd known?
There's nothing can be done with this at the minute.
That's not a bad lockdown lid, I must admit, Mark.
This is my 11-year-old daughter's attempt. I'm not going to show you the back because
you've got a Peaky Blinders step, have you?
Yeah, it's just like a full. Yeah.
This is my 14-year-old niece's attempt.
We're putting a lot of trust. I come home and I was like, Olivia, you can do whatever you want. You know, put your mind to it as long as you commit to something. She went, I want to be a hairdresser. And I was like,
Afternoon, chaps.
Hello. Afternoon.
How are we all?
Right, does anyone know if there's a way I can automatically admit all? That'll do. Right, that's got them all in, I think.
Oh, we're in.
There we go.
I don't know how I get my video what you want.
Hello.
Stephen Penson's iPhone has joined us. But hopefully we'll get Stephen Penson as well.
Somewhere. I'm on, but I'm eating, so I'll save it my face.
Carnage. Wow.
It's like Crime Watch. Like they're back to back.
Neil's head.
More like the Muppets.
That's it.
Simon, have you got
me
on video, mate?
Just for those who have joined us, I am recording. So you're on the,
Thank you,
I hope
Simon.
you've got your equity cards ready. Okay, let's see if there's any more to admit. Afternoon, Russell.
It's a lady's touch as well.
I'd like to pretend that I'm giving every 5 minutes so everyone joins, but it's actually me just faffing around. But we'll talk amongst yourselves for a few minutes. It's one of our younger coaches there, voicing their.
I'm just doing parenting at the same time before training tonight.
I knew it was yours.
You knew it was mine.
Well, that mum's.
I could tell by the lungs.
Yeah, that is. It is. Hashtag parent life before training, before everything. So I have so much time during the day and during everything to do rugby and everything else. It's just.
You're not actually having to teach people, are you, Albert?
You don't really do anything else.
No, but I've been in charge today and tomorrow and thinking, and there's been loads and loads of problems.
Right.
I thought how we just broke up fights.
No, but don't just break up fights. That was the other day.
Well done.
Stop people stabbing each other.
And true, if all you do is hug trees.
And you deliver the soil, don't you, Chris? Barrows of soil down the road.
Just while we're waiting, can everyone just type in the chat box what age group or what section they're representing, just so I can see if we've missed anybody.
You don't know,
You technical, how am I supposed to know that?
Dog, I'm trying to eat dinner, man.
Missed that. Well, we got Alex
I definitely need a jacket for training.
Yeah.
Right, I will. Come.
So are we doing the year will be taken over the current year?
Oh no, they can go to 80% answer value.
I've done the next year. Finished last year.
I've done next year.
Next season as well.
Next year.
Under 8s, under 9s then for me, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What can anyone see on my video?
Rugby Executive Map version 1.
Excellent. We're doing well then. We'll keep remembering to admit people first. Sorry.
Aye, son.
Who's that?
Okay. I'll make a start. I imagine there's some questions at the end, and there's probably a lot to go through, I hope. Thanks for those who have joined us. Hopefully we've got most sections, age groups represented here. If not, it is being recorded.
Should we unmute so we
Yeah.
can crack on?
Yeah, thanks. I'm sure I can mute all, but I haven't found that function yet. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, if you can all mute, that'd be great. So really two things wanting to do today, and we might need a follow-up session. It'd probably be worth it in a couple of weeks, see how we're all going on anyway. But the two things I wanted to do is just sort of bring you up to speed on where we are in terms of the general guidance and the return to rugby process, and how this has been applied to Camp Hill. It's going to be fairly generic across the sections, but obviously there'll be some bits that are more specific to one section than another. So it's been a fairly surreal sort of couple of months, hasn't it? And in the last 2 to 3 weeks especially, there's been an increased volume and change, which we've been looking at and choosing when's the right time to have the facility of returning to practice. And up until really only a week and a half ago, the guidance was, as you'll all know, was really around only one-to-one contact with members of the same household. So up until that point, I think one thing to mention is that a lot of the groups, a lot of the age groups have kept contacts virtually with each other, which has been absolutely fantastic. But obviously there's no substitute for seeing each other in the flesh, which is where we're heading now. So over the last 10 days, there's been a relaxation, and I guess what's come out as well has been the RFU's roadmap. So just going through the general RFU guidance, if you can see that screen, the roadmap effectively takes us through 6 stages. So we've moved from where we were about the 23rd of May, exercising one other person. We were doing some distance training, etc., in groups. In age groups, but not anything of any particular note. And then on the 2nd, 3rd, 4th of June, something like that, we had the relaxation of small group training. So that's the bit we're going to focus on mainly today, both what the RFU is saying and also how we're interpreting that locally as a club. And some of it is a little bit of suck it and see. Some of it is about really getting a consensus about what we feel. There's no hard and fast rules within some of the guidance. So we do need to think actually what works for us, what seems sensible. And I think the common sense approach, where there is a measure of where there's a measure of discretion required, is the way that we'll take that. So we're here at B, and just to sort of cast our eyes forward in terms of where we're going, obviously the next stage, see large group training, which is basically face-to-face, still not required, but we can actually have some social distancing at times that might be relaxed, limited face-to-face. Moving through to D, which is where you're looking again at a larger group still. I don't know what a larger group constitutes at the moment. I mean, they've got 10 bodies on their picture there, but I think we need to have a reasonable discussion about when we get to that point about what a larger group is. And then finally, we got preparation for matches. So again, that's where we're thinking close contact could be permitted. So we're getting more into the nuts and bolts of what we'd see as rugby training as we know it. Just worth pausing there and saying, actually, for minis and juniors, the whole of this time, we're still under Regulation 15, which is summer activities. So Debs has sent out a link on how to minis and juniors. We'll send out a pack of links to this as well, which sort of gives you guidance on what you can do, which is non-rugby related things during the summer. Just because we've lost a couple of months at the end of the season doesn't mean that the RFU have relaxed Regulation 15. So there's quite a good website, actually, there's quite a good web link that gives you those sorts of activities on there. If it's not age grade rugby, effectively then it's up to our discretion as to what sort of activities as we move into this D&E over here. And then in terms of the timeline, because what the RFU haven't done is given us a timeline on on how long this will be, obviously, because it's dependent on government regulations and advice. But I think they're indicating there should be a minimum of a 4-week period between E and F. So you can see if we got to the end of August or even into September and we were still at E, you're looking at a month at minimum delay to the actual contacts of return to match play. I'll pause there. If there are any questions, I'll take them at the end. Or if you want to drop them down, I will try and have a look at the chat as well. If I don't get to answer them now, I'll have a look at them after the discussion. Okay, so where we are now, as we said.
I think there's some people still get their microphones unmuted, and I'm struggling to hear you at times. Can we just check we're all on mute?
There's a lot who aren't on mute.
Yeah. Really,
I'm trying to mute all.
For one.
Okay, that seems a lot better. There seems to be less kerfuffle. Okay, so we're at B. And what does that mean in terms of what we can do, what we can't do? You may all well have seen this infographic here, which is predominantly around the small group training. So it's up to 6, including the coach. 2 meters distance, outdoor field training, no physical contact still. Players can train with their own household. So if you had a household of more than 6, clearly they would be allowed to train together. But there's a stipulation around once every 24 hours. So hopefully that doesn't impinge on any of us too much. We wouldn't usually be looking to train more than once in a 24-hour period. But the effect is we're looking at the 2 meters apart there. Equipment sharing, this is the bit I think which needs discretion really. Equipment sharing, including balls, should be kept to a minimum. So it's gone fairly quickly from not suggesting we share equipment at all to saying actually we can do. So I think it really depends on how rigorous you are with your hand hygiene. So passing drills and things like that, as long as it's not excessive, as long as we do drills and then at regular intervals, as the coach can discretion, we stop and we can wash the balls, we can rub the balls down. But I think also alongside that is washing, sanitizing hands regularly, and we'll come to some of the RFU guidance and also some of the guidance we've put in there for you as coaches to sort of guide on that. This last one here is interesting. So Clubhouse currently can open for access to toilets and to serve takeaway food and drink. Scrub the second part of that. We are only opening the club for the toilets, and we're waiting for our facilities committee to just pass that off, that toilets are accessible. I think they're going to be changing room toilets that we'll be using. Until you hear otherwise, I would suspect that you can use them unless you hear we say that the risk assessment hasn't gone well, which it will do. Okay, so just recently, very recently, in the last 24, 48 hours, the RFU have actually issued some phased return small group training guidance. So again, we'll send all these links out. But I think there's two or three things to note specifically from this. There is a webinar as part of this link, and I had a look at it earlier, and it's got some useful stuff around returning back to rugby. The focus really is on graduated returns, so we're not going straight into full-blown killing everybody on bee stings, even though Halby's probably got that as part of his plan for tonight. It really does talk about graduated, talking about, especially with the kids, how much activity they have been doing or how little activity they've been doing, not going full-blown straight off, but actually working our way into that. So there is a useful webinar on there with a link to some resources around potential activities you might want to try, possibly more geared to age grade rugby, but also there are things there that can be used common across all of our sections. And the second bit there is there's a link to a document which he calls a risk assessment. Now, what we've got as a club is we've done a club risk assessment for training, and we're not expecting every single age group or every single group to do this risk assessment. But what we've got built into the guidance that you'll see in a bit is all of those things as questions. So how would you deal with this? What's your preparation standard for various things like? Okay, so then some practical tips for coaching sessions, so 2 metre social distancing. Players are clear on how social distance will be maintained. So what are the drills that you're putting in there to keep that distancing? Sharing equipment, again, kept to a minimum. What is a minimum? Then I think we reflect on that in our training plans. Equipment used should be disinfected prior to and after every session. Players should wash hands and sanitize their hands. If they're passing the ball to it, the constant reminding not to then touch their face. In the transition between activities, players should maintain the social distance. So it's not like where we have a break, we come in all in together and we explain the next exercise. We actually have to maintain that 2 metre. Equipment removed from the training area and disinfected before its use by others. And we'll come on to some of the practicalities of that in a minute. And then discouraging touching hands and face to remove sweat. So it says to making available disposable hand towels and sanitizer for players to use during the session. And again, we'll come into what players should bring and what the club's going to provide for training sessions in a moment. Fairly obvious one, no sharing of water bottles there. It's more the practicalities of how we make sure that happens and people don't pick up the wrong one. And then no more than one group should be active on any quarter of any pitch. And again, we've got some specific Camp Hill interpretation of that at the moment, which we'll come on to in a bit. Then parents and carers permitted to observe a session from a distance, but must observe safeguarding guidelines. Okay, so there's some fairly good but fairly obvious potentially points there, but it's worth having those at the back of your mind as you go through the training sessions. So that's effectively what a small group might look like. That's the RFU guidance. What we also want to, can anyone see? Can anyone see, does it say RFU headlines on your screen? Somebody's going to have to come off mute to tell me.
Nope.
No.
No, okay, one moment.
No.
Okay. Just bear with me a moment. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing that. Okay, have I reappeared?
Sadly.
Yes.
I share that. Right. So what the club's actually done over the last couple of weeks is work quite hard. And thanks to Debs for a lot of her initial work on this as well. It's just quite a detailed risk assessment so that we can give you some assurance that the club's not only thought about returning to training, but we've actually put the steps in place to do that as well. Okay, so okay, you've got to tell me what you're seeing now. Can you see anything that says actions required before any return to training?
Yep.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah.
And it also means you can't see me, so that's great. Okay, so we'll send you the links to the risk assessment document, but as with most risk assessment documents, it's looking at all angles, and we want you to really focus on the things that you need to do as a coach. So it's there for information. You can read through it if you want, but actually what we've done is we've distilled the actions that were required from you guys as coaches. This really was just a timeline in terms of how we're going to get training up and going, in terms of comms, and really where you come in effectively is when you've decided that your age group or your coaches want to return to training. So we can probably pause on that for a minute now, because not all sections, not all age groups, not all coaches will or even indeed should want to return to training right at the moment. It's very much your decision. It needs to feel right for you as the coaches. We've obviously picked up the bits around you need to have DBS clearance to actually take a group on your own. Some kids within each group or some coaches in each group might not want to return at the moment, and they might be worried about this. So there's absolutely no pressure for anybody to return. And I think, you know, the communication from coaches and managers to individual players and parents who might not want to return is absolutely key. But we do want to say that actually this is a choice. It's not expected of you. Again, that might apply differently at different levels of the club. You know, if you're if you're a budding or a would-be first-team player and training is started here, you're probably going to put yourself under more pressure to train than you would do if you were 7 or 8 year old. But as I say, across the whole of the section, we realise that there are concerns, and we don't want people to feel obliged to train. Although, when we get closer to the season, that might change depending on the age group and the section. So really, this bit around comms, players, parents is to both reinforce the fact that they're not obliged to come training, but also it's around that there are safety measures in place and they are going to be periodically reviewed. The next step, I think, in terms of laying on the sessions is looking at the equipment that you're likely to want and need for those training sessions, and making sure that you've got an idea of how many groups are going to train, how many coaches you've got to train, and how can we distribute that equipment effectively across those coaching groups so we're not having one set of equipment being passed from group to group. Now, there might be an issue with that, certainly with the small groups. And I think, we then need to look at practicalities around disinfecting and then passing them on and limiting the amount of contact where possible. Distribution of sanitizers and hand wipes for use at training. So what we've got been set up at the moment is we've got a pack, a rugby safe pack of masks, gloves, sanitizer for hand washing, and wipes, disinfectant wipes for equipment. Now, we'll move on to that in a bit, but effectively our rugby safe coordinators putting those together, and what we're going to have to do is find a way of distributing to those to coaches of each of those groups before they go out, and we'll come back to that in a minute. Okay. We mentioned about club toilets. At the moment, we believe that they're open, available for use. I'm just waiting for a final thumbs up on that one. I think we've only got seniors training tonight, so that'll be out hopefully before 7 o'clock that we can okay on that one. And then the location of training. So it's worth pausing on this one because we haven't got official sign off from the council to train on the park. They effectively said small group activities can go ahead, but they didn't give us the permission effectively to have floods of Campill and Campillians spread out across the park. So what we're doing, certainly at the moment until we get a bit more authorisation, is we're having one group per pitch. The RFU says that you can get up to 4 groups of 6 on each pitch, but at the moment we're just playing it quite safe so that we aren't storming out into the community and pissing off our public as well as the council. So we are doing some planning around where people are training. We've got a training spreadsheet effectively, and each of the sections has a lead contact for that spreadsheet. So booking through training on through that portal. So just so you know, the minis and juniors have Eugene McDade, John Simpson, and Hugh Bristow. The seniors is Steve Halbert. Leanne is the contact for Ladies Touch, and Russ Baker is the contact for Mixed Touch and for Junior Touch as well. So we're actually going to work out so we don't overburden the park, all turn up at the same place at the same time. But what that might mean is that we need to look off-site if we've got, because obviously potentially up to 50 or 60 groups and a limited amount of space in the park. So we may need to look at other training areas, pitches, etc. Okay, so probably the nuts and bolts now, and probably the last bit I'll go through before pausing, and hopefully we'll have a bit of time for some questions. A sort of checklist for you. I say it's drawn from a lot of the other information you've seen. It's applying a bit of Campill to it, and hopefully a bit of common sense as well. So we're looking at training groups, obviously no greater than 6. Groups of players containing under 18 should only be coached by coaches with a valid DBS. Okay, so this might cause some issues to age groups where they have only a small number of coaches, or where the coaches I know haven't got a current DBS. Now we're working really to look at what flexibility we've got around that. Now, as I said, if we were not at Campill, so we could have more than one group of 6 if we weren't in Shirley Park. So we were on some some private land that we'd found, or an area where you think actually, you know, there's bountiful space here, you may want to get 2 groups of 6, both separated from each other, with one coach who is DBS checked, working with one coach who isn't DBS checked. But effectively, you'd have to have 2 sessions running conjointly with not necessarily the DBS check coach leading it, but you'd have to have that DBS check coach effectively overseeing the non-DBS. So they couldn't go off into separate parts of the park where they can't see each other and do training sessions. You'd have to have it a little bit more co-located. So we're looking at the flexibility around that. Location, and again, liaise with the section lead that I mentioned to ensure that location is approved and won't clash with other camp hill groups. No groups should be within, now I'm putting 25 metres of each other at any point. I think that's debatable. 25 metres is an ultra cautious amount of space, but I certainly wouldn't say that they have to be within 2 metres of each other at any point. So I think, you know, a bit of common sense, given the area where you are, if it's 10, 15 metres, and it allows those 2 groups to be run conjointly, I think we should probably look at that as being acceptable. As I mentioned, because of the issues around both congregating at start and end of sessions, and also the fact that you know, we don't want the council to know that we're actually taking over the park, if you can identify locations of parking that are away from the club if possible. So you've got the back of Aldi and Shirley Park, you've got Hurdis Road, you've probably got Asda at certain times of day where you can park as well. So try and spread out those parking issues so we don't have big congregations of players and parents, etc. So as I mentioned, each of those groups will have a pack, will be given, distributed a pack of sanitizer, mask, gloves, disinfectant wipes, and we'll send out details how you collect that from the Rugby Safe coordinator. She's got the link which tells us where people are training and when, so hopefully we'll be able to either have a pack waiting for you then, or coaches can come and pick one up from the club at various points. So just a bit of coordination required on that. We mentioned around communication to players and parents, details of training venue, reiterate safety protocol and the expectations of the players to follow that. Ensure players bring their own water bottles and they're clearly labelled so that we don't get sharing of, there's going to be 1,000 of those blue Camp Hill bottles, I think, which will probably get mixed up if they don't have names on them, or if you don't tell your players to put them in a specific place and make sure they only use their own. I'd suspect names on the bottles, certainly for age grade, are better. And then we need registers of players and the coach who are training in each of the group of 6. And the reason for that is, as we'll come on to later after the session, if there are any COVID symptoms being suffered by any of the players or the coach, then we've actually got a duty to inform the rest of that group there. We don't have to tell them who it is. We just have to say, you know, you might want to or you will be required to self-isolate. And that will all be done through the Rugby Safe coordinator as well. Equipment. So as I said earlier, we should look at where we can, having each group having its own equipment, should be clean pre-session, shared out and kept, not at the club effectively, because that will involve coming back to the club. Lots of times it should be kept with the coach if it can, or with a responsible person. Doesn't have to be the coach, but it should come to the training sessions with that consistent person. And as I said, if it is currently located at the club, then you'll need to arrange to go and pick up and distribute out that equipment. Training activities, naturally within the 2 metre distancing between players, and there are some training activities on that link there, which will come out with the notes of this. First aid, obviously we're in the position where we're not expecting, well, we won't be looking at contact. You might get twists or strains, I suspect, from running. Certainly hamstrings, mine would go. So first aid is going to be minimal, but if you are required to come closer than that 2 metre distance to a player as a coach, then you should put on the masks and the gloves that are in the pack that are going to be distributed. Okay, we're nearly there. During training, equipment sharing. So appropriate equipment sharing. So if it's a passing drill, clearly there's going to have to be some fair amount of distribution of that ball between players. But if you can do a passing drill, obviously reinforce the need to not touch their face in between, and then have a hand sanitizing session after areas where there are lots of contact between equipment, between people, and give the balls a rub down. I mentioned the hand sanitizing break and the toilets there. There's a link there, which is some small group guidance for coaches, which is effectively what we'd worked through earlier. And then some bits here around the risk assessment issues to consider. So where we've put disposable towels, I think we're probably going to suggest that each player brings their own towel, because you can imagine imagine Shirley Park being awash with thrown away used disposable towels or even unused disposable towels. Gel sanitizer, equipment cleaner, defect and sanitized. So a lot of this is repeating what we've already been through. No handshaking, no huddles, no touching face. And then if there is any with suspected symptoms afterwards, as I said, we'll be sending out the email address to the rugby club rugby safe coordinator. And finally, after training, one final hand sanitisation, coaches or a responsible person to clean the equipment, ready for the next session, or if you are passing it on, obviously it's then cleaned, ready for that. Communicate what to do to the players if they're feeling unwell, and then an orderly and swift departure. I know the guys and girls haven't seen each other for so long. There will be a temptation to stand in their groups and even have a little shout over at people, but there will be people coming, there may be parents observing this. So if we can just make sure that we don't delay on the leaving, or even when you're arriving, to be there sort of not too long before, 5 minutes before, and go straight to the training area that's been identified. I think, so I'll get myself back on this, yeah. I think that's everything in a massive brain dump of information there. So I realise there's going to be an awful lot that we can go back over now. I'm not sure how long people got. I've got this until, well, actually I've got it now until 6:30 if people want to take questions. Obviously some people might need to go. If you wanted to put things in the chat, and I'll either come back to them now if nobody's asking questions, or we'll give a written response to them. So I will let you fire away.
Yeah, I've asked a question, and I think it might be relevant to like the older junior groups, but if you could read that and let me know what you think.
Okay, do you want to say it, Sam, and whilst other people are either thinking if they want to ask a question or highlight one of the ones they've asked?
So I'm going into under 16s with Alex, who's on the chat, and I'm thinking about, I've got a squad of 30 and making something manageable. So could one coach run 2 groups of 5 as long as they were separated by, say, 10 metres? You know, the lads are old enough to kind of self-motivate and regulate now. So if we set an exercise, they do it, and then the coach walks to the other group, keeping you 2 metres apart. So it'll take a bit of organising, but not that hard really, with a set of cones to say, look, you stay over there, you stay over there. It just means that a single coach, like I, could take 2 groups of 5, Alex could take 2 groups of 5, Ben could take 2 groups of 5, presuming we've got the space, and then the session's done. Does that feel reasonable, as long as the coach doesn't mingle between the 2 groups?
The only thing I'd say on that, and it is at the moment, is that what we're trying to do is to not overload any one area of council ground. So as I said, if you found an area that certainly wasn't Shirley Park, but you actually felt that you weren't taking over a whole area, I don't really see there being a problem with that going forward. I think it's just at the moment, probably for the next week or 2, until we've got some clarity from the council around having those groups within, as you said, the coach might come within 2 metres of both groups, and I haven't really thought about that. I envisage one coach in the middle coaching both groups, or one coach being with one group and shouting across to the other one. I think you'd have to be careful though not to have 4 groups on the same pitch, like like the RFU were saying we should, but the council aren't saying that.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sam, you went then.
But I'm thinking you could maybe have 2. So what I'm saying is, could you have, like, if you've got 5 kids there and 5 kids there, that's only 10 kids. coach isn't getting too close to both, I don't think that'd be possible. You know, that would be really hard for the little age groups. But the older age groups, I don't know if that. Are you saying 10 is too many to have 10 kids on a pitch in the park's too many?
If exceptional circumstances, maybe 10 would be fine. I think, as I said, I think what we've done is we've started now, and at the moment we've still got a relatively small number of groups that are booked in for training, so it's very manageable, and people aren't having to go off site. The problem is if we start saying 10, then other groups might want 15, 20. So I think you know, if we said, when are you planning on training, Sam? Is it this week?
I'm hoping it starts Tuesday. John's booked it on. I need to double check what he's
next Tuesday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maximum size pitch we can play with him.
If I just add into that as well, Sam, on that, in theory, that for me that sounds fine. I guess where we've been coming from is that if you did 2 groups of 5 on the park pitch, and then somebody else did it on the football pitch, and then somebody else did it on the amphitheatre, and somebody else did it in Herdish Road, then all of a sudden we've got 50 kids or so, which from an infection control perspective sounds fine, but from a community perspective, suddenly the community haven't got any park left. And that's why booking through this system is really important, so that we manage how many people we've got in the park at any one time. Or if you might have identified another space, another park, that everybody hasn't also identified that same park, and you don't all turn up at the same time. So we're trying to be really mindful of the community at the same time as being mindful of our own infection control and safety protocols.
Can I just put in for 1 second? I've been in Shirley Park for the last few Saturdays and Sundays, and there's football teams and there's all sorts of people training in the park, so I don't think you're going to have the space for people to use the park as well as everybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I think one of the things we're encouraging.
Training, they've got nets up on the football goals. Everyone has got back to it at the same sort of stage as we are, but everyone is using the parks. So I think you're going to struggle with Shirley Park. Yeah,
and I think what we would encourage people to do, and I know from my own age group, we've had suggestions coming in of using alternative places. Now, whether it's private land that we try it and we get kicked off it, I don't know. You know, I'm clearly not advocating we will go and invade areas that we're not allowed to. But there are lots of suggestions that have come forward from a number of coaches about other places we can use. And if you took 10 people, Sam, down to, I don't know, part of Bruton Park or something, then you can't imagine that being as disruptive as having your 10 plus another 10 plus another 10 at Shirley Park. So I suggest if you're going to do that, try and use another area.
The places where the places where the seniors train in during the season when the weather's rubbish, things like Solihull School, King Edwards, and Lighthall and whatnot, are they options that we could use or not?
Schools have put themselves out of bounds on this one. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. I think they don't want the added risk brought on.
That's fair.
I might have missed the trick, but regardless of where we get the opportunity, be it council, Camp Hill, or wherever, is there a maximum minimum size area? And obviously the minimum is probably the most important, but is there a certain size area we should keep a pod of 6 to?
I think there's probably a minimum area, isn't there, which I guess is, if you looked at lining up 2 metres between each other, 6, you could probably looking at 12 metres by probably, 20
give yourself
meters.
a bit of grace, so 15 by just because I'm just looking at my figure. I've got 30 kids in our age group, 6 group. That's not feasible to do that many, because that you need the whole pitch, wouldn't you, with the 25-metre rule in there.
Well, as I said, the 25-metre rule was to make sure that we weren't too congregated on one area, but you would have to look at, what did you say, 30? You'd look at 6 groups spread out.
Yeah.
And some age groups are doing two sessions, so the coaches
we've said we'll probably
you can probably get 12 per coach per hour per session.
But there isn't a I'm just working out, is there a certain size we're allowed to? We don't, like, I can set up 12 cones, 15 cones one way, and I could go for a hectare.
Well, I think if you're using the principle of only having one group on a council pitch at the moment, like a rugby-sized pitch, then you could effectively, but I think as David said, you might find that you are actually on there at the same time as a group of lads who are using the park for football or, you know, for having a picnic or something. So, you know, it's not exclusively our space. We can't, I mean, I guess the other thing to say is we can't use our own pitches until probably the end of August because of pitch maintenance. So we haven't got any automatic rights to these areas. So we're booking it, and it's a bit misleading to say we're booking it. We can't go onto the park pitch and kick a load of 15-year-olds off because they're having a beer.
And can I question that pitch maintenance? I don't understand that. We haven't played on the club pitches, really, with all the rain, much the whole of this year. Why did we end of August the pitch maintenance?
Because the pitch maintenance is down to external companies that come in and do pitch maintenance, and then it requires time after that. So what we couldn't do, or didn't do, and probably couldn't do as well actually, was bring forward all the pitch maintenance to March when the pitches were off. But we've got, obviously, you know, Sam, we've got the playing affairs group, we've got the head of grounds is on the pitch allocation group now. So we are actually questioning that, and we will get on as quickly as we can, given the fact that obviously it hasn't been used as well. But the other area is that we know that the park pitches are in a terrible state as well. Yeah, and they don't get the amount of money spent on them that the club pitches do. So we're trying to push on whether we do maintenance ourselves on the park pitches as well. Otherwise, we'll start to lose games across the season. I mean, it's probably dangerous now from a sort of if it's rock hard point of view, but
it's like concrete and there's ruts in it, and it's not in a good state.
Yeah, so there'll probably be a few turned ankles, and you know, not that we can do contact at the moment, but it's probably going to be pretty horrible for that later on in the summer. Not that minis and juniors can do contact properly like that until.
No. Well, to be fair, me and Mark was having a chat earlier, and all these little pops and bumps. To be fair, with mini and juniors, well, for the under-9s group, that's what me and Mark was chatting about earlier. I think we're going to park it for a little while. It's not really worth the trouble and the hassle for what they're going to get out of it.
Yeah. I mean, again,
we're in the close season as it is, so they wouldn't be doing anything now anyway, would they?
No, they wouldn't normally. No.
So, yes, we've lost out on some time at the end of the season, but I'm sure we can make that up when the new season starts.
Yeah, and it is speculation, but you could easily see within a couple of weeks you'll have potentially a reduction to 1 metre, potentially groups going up to 10, 15. So all you're probably doing by delaying it a couple of weeks is that initial fitness work that they'll be doing.
Yeah. Which will most probably work out better if they reduce it to 1 metre and we can actually do more with them. It'll work out better than it is, because to be fair, our group's not very interactive anyway, unfortunately.
Yeah. I could never pass more than 1 metre anyway, so.
I can't run more than 1 metre.
Perfect then.
Bob, there's a few questions that have come through on the chat.
Okay. Back on for them. Right. So the first one I've come from is the school fields, Ilsley School Fields.
Dog, I've got to go now. Just got to sort the kids out before training. Okay.
Thanks, Albs.
No problem. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
So we can ask about school fields that aren't on school premises. We can certainly do that. We've had Sam's question there. Will there be a first aid kit for each bubble? I would say no. I think in you know, if you were being true to what we should do, every bubble should have a first aid kit. I think the risk-based approach is there probably won't be anything that's contact related, that you would need bandages or wipes and things. You have got some a pack with some wipes in there and a mask. But it's unlikely to require a full first aid kit. And Debs will tell me what the cost is. I imagine for 60 bubbles with 60 times whatever we've got. I think each age group does have one. Do we pass that around? Do we have one available on site with each group who turns up? I think we should. I think there should be a first aid kit there. We should probably know who's got it. If it's one coach from one bubble, and then if we absolutely do need that first aid kit, then yes, we know where it is. But I think it's unlikely that we'll. Certainly the club aren't going to be looking at providing first aid kits for every bubble. No. Bucket of soapy water for ball washing. Was that?
Yeah, but isn't it 72 hours before it dies on whatever it's on? So if someone's doing a training session one day and someone is doing a training session 2 days afterwards, stuff doesn't need sanitising, does it?
I think what we're saying is just best practice, because because let's say somebody does pick up a bag full of equipment or whatever and uses it. I think it's just. I mean, are you talking about the first aid kit there or the equipment?
Well, everything in general.
Yeah.
Shops are reopening and they're saying if someone picks something up, it gets put in a room for 72 hours, and after 72 hours, the virus, if it was on there, he's not there no more.
No.
So I'm thinking,
it's a risk-based approach, isn't it? You could pick up a bag of crisps in a supermarket that's just been put there by somebody less than 72 hours before, and so the chances are passing over a first aid bag, as long as that's all it is, might be fine. Might be fine. It might be a necessity. I don't see the first aid kit being the absolute necessity at every training session anyway. But people might want it there. And I think you have to make some provisions amongst yourself and take a risk-based approach to that. Somebody wants a bucket of soapy water. For their washing their balls. Yeah, fine. And to be fair, what we've done is we've set up an initial pack, and we're going to review the use of that because clearly everything's got a resource implication. And if people are prepared, if it's a more cost-effective way, we'll certainly look at that. What we wanted to do was give everybody the provision to get off and start training now if they wanted to. Thank you, Fish. You can buy me a beer later. There has been a lot of work gone into it, yeah. It's only just starting as well. Claire, really good points. I would suggest that if you're at other facilities, you can't guarantee that, and it might be useful. Like we would have to do at the club if we weren't sure about it being safe to go to the toilets at the club. I think people are going to have to find a bush or go home. Unfortunately, I think that's very sexist there. You can get the she-wees out, I think. But genuinely, I think if there are worries about things like that, then I think players, they're 45-minute sessions, so it may be somebody needs the toilet halfway through it, and I think if they're not comfortable, if coaches aren't comfortable with the facilities, then the best thing to do is to go home. And obviously parents are going to be there for certainly lots of the younger age groups as well. So
that's where the younger thing comes into it, because kids realise that they need a poo within 30 seconds.
Just the younger ones.
I need a poo now.
Yeah. And absolutely, I think anything other than being at the club where we know it's been deep cleaned and we know that there's hand washing facilities and things like that, and we are going to try and patrol people going in there and out, then I think you are looking at struggling to get that amount of security on the toilet facilities. Junior kit handover, keep last year's kit until September update. Debs, do you want to come in on that one?
No.
Tough, because I haven't got an answer to that one.
So I guess the original plan was that the bins that have got the mini and junior equipment in would stay with the age group because it's age group specific. Obviously now what we're saying is that coaches might need to go and retrieve some equipment from the bin. to facilitate these training sessions. And as Doug mentioned earlier, we then hope that the coach kept that with them for the purposes of this until such a time as we're back to anything near normal and we can put equipment back in the bins. But then the handover would be, my expectation would be that, as an example, what's in the under-8s bin from last season is the under-8s for next season, because it is all quite specific. So I think we probably, without wanting to over-engineer it, we probably need to just be, just approach it sensibly. Try and retrieve the kit that you might need for your sessions that you want to do over the summer while we're in this period. And then when we get back to any sort of normality, I would expect a bin to be available per age group again.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yep. Claire, we're going to make sure that parents stay with the junior kids. As much as we can ever make sure that they stay with any of the kids. I think it would be, again, they're only 45-minute sessions. I think if you are coming back to training now, then I think it would be advisable that they are in the vicinity. And we've actually got RFU guidance that says they actually can be in the vicinity, obviously observing social distancing. Yes, we could use training areas at other clubs. And then, yes, we would like to see a separate risk assessment for that site.
Well, John, sorry, Doug, I've just responded to John on that, just to say,
okay.
I think I'm just nervous about that, because John, I'm thinking from a touch perspective, ladies' touch perspective, are you thinking maybe you might have access to Sills or something, or I don't know, somewhere else, I'm guessing. I think we just need to be really careful that if you or any team have got access to another club's facilities and you'd want to use them, if we start asking for their risk assessments, we're going to get ourselves into a bottomless pit of assessing other people's risk assessments. And Doug, you know how hard it's been to get us to this point for Camp Hill. So I'd be mindful that that if you as a group of people are going to use somebody else's facilities, and by that I don't mean the parks, I mean specifically another club, then you need to assure yourselves that you're happy that they've taken this as seriously as I hope you think we're taking this.
Yeah.
So in other words, we're going to be, we do our own internal risk assessment as a team, and then decide, whether to go ahead or not. And it's a question for me whether you need a record of our having done that risk assessment internally or not. Whether that's a club policy basically covering our arse to say, yeah, okay, Touch have done the risk assessment to go and play at Sills, and here it is. Do you want that?
Oh, sorry. So yeah, I don't think that's bad practice for us to be as Camp Hill, because you're affiliated with Camp Hill, that you've assured yourself that you're comfortable. What I meant was I wouldn't expect us to then see Sills' risk assessment as well. Because what are we going to do with that if we're not happy? Then suddenly we're in this spiral of risk assessments.
Yeah. No, that's understood. That's clear. Thank you.
Thank you,
John.
John.
I think, to be honest, that each age category is going to have to take the Camp Hill risk assessment and add things that pertain to their age group anyway, because we know that there are going to be specific things. Also, if you've got specific children that may need something else, in the same way that a normal risk assessment would be adapted, we're going to have to be slightly, on that. Flexible. That's what I was going for.
Definitely.
Doug, just a quick one. I don't know if I missed it, it's already been covered, but if we're talking about a coach being responsible for a small group of players, and in a sense being in that bubble, is that coach going to have to stay with that bubble and therefore not coach other teams within that age group? Or are we saying there's flexibility within that? So if I rock up one week, or say on a Tuesday and coach one age group, and then on a Thursday either go to another age group or go train another set of players from the same age group, are we saying that's not allowed? What's the stance on that?
That's too tricky a question, Steve, so I'm going to say I've already covered it. we did discuss this when we were doing the risk assessment, and we're trying to, obviously, we've got on one hand being ultra safe and making sure there's no comeback on, well, there's no health risks, there's no concerns amongst parents and players. And on the other hand, realising that there's a restriction that, you know, we've only got a limited amount of coaches. We've got even less who are DBS checked now. And I think what we sort of came down to saying is it can be done. What we wouldn't want coaches to do is to take too many groups of players within a certain amount of time. Now, I know that certainly the seniors are doing one group of 6 and then another group of 6. But they're doing a booking system. So the next week, or even 2 days later, they might have a completely different group of 5 players with them. And the chances of having the same 5 week on week is absolutely, it's just incalculable. Whether age groups have the ability to do that will depend on the numbers of coaches they've got, obviously. And they may decide, actually, we can keep this coach with a group of 5 and another group of 5, and that can be quite consistent. But then can they do that every week? If they can, great. I think what I'm trying to say is that if you are constrained, then you aren't constrained to one. If you're constrained to the number of coaches, I wouldn't suggest that you only have one coach per 5 kids, because otherwise you'd then have let's say you had 2 coaches and 30 kids, you'd have 20 kids who would never be able to train. So we've got to be reasonable about this. I think we've got to say, actually, yeah, that coach, maybe not coaching another group immediately the day after, but if we gave them 48 hours, if the coach or if anybody in that group is reporting any COVID symptoms in that 48 hours, clearly then there's going to be a self-isolation, and they're not going to coach on the Thursday if they've coached on the Tuesday. So I think, yeah, we've got to allow some flexibility rather than having one coach to 5. A set 5 players. Does that answer? I sort of waffled on.
No, it does, mate. And that's the thing. It's all of this is, as you say, it's ultra cautious, and it's making sure we're putting parameters in place. But there's got to be an element of realism as well, because it's, as you said, it's a voluntary setup. There's only so many people doing it. As you said, there's only so many people who are qualified to do it. And yeah, it's the close season, and chances are, as you've already mentioned, 4 weeks' time, will be in a different position. But for those teams that want to start off now, it's just the clarity from the club, just in case a parent asks, is probably what coaches need to have. That's one.
And I think that's it. And I think us saying that doesn't mean that you have to do that. If you as a coaching group go, actually, our parents are going to kick off if we do this, then take the ultra cautious route. It would restrict the kids' access to training, but that might be the right thing to do. It might be the right thing at the moment that you only take one group this week and one group next week, or not at all, as Dave was saying at the moment. So yeah, you know your parents, you know your players best, and you know how much of they want to get back. But that doesn't mean to training. But that doesn't mean that we have to do everything we can to get them back to training if you don't feel it's safe.
Steve, just on that, are you particularly talking about touch, or are you talking about micros and little people?
Well, I mean, under 6s. I've got a program for under 6s starting next week, Deb. What are you talking about? Those little bastards are going to work through the summer.
Just thinking, my experience of watching social distancing with that lot is.
Oh, there is no such. Just lock them in a cage, stick them in a barrel together, and they might as well ride on top of each other.
That's in our next risk assessment.
Yeah,
no. Million juniors, just forget it, mate.
Yeah. No. It's not. I wasn't talking about. Certainly wasn't talking about under 6s. Perhaps thinking about my son and his mates who are who'll be under 8s this year. So with Carl's permission, I was going to maybe do a little run around every so often. But again, it's more from, I know Will has got and Russ have got the touch guys coming back, but it's just an understanding as to where the club stands on it all. But yeah, no, I agree with David. We're not going back with the minis anytime soon. So.
Do we have to do something where we're keeping a record? As you said, that the children we're working with may not be the same ones week in, week out. do we sort of need to keep a record of who we were working with? So say 2 days time I develop symptoms, we've got a way of tracking which children I was then working with, so we can contact them.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Do we send that on the day of the training? Not that I'm doing the training, but just while the question's been raised.
I think that only comes in when we get somebody reporting COVID symptoms.
So we just take
I don't think you send it anywhere, Mark. I think we'd expect you as coaches running the session to keep records of who was in that session.
Yeah, book, date, time, who was there.
Yeah, and then if as Doug said, if in 24, 48, even a week later, somebody in your session reported symptoms, we need to be able to responsibly track that back and let other people know that they might have been exposed.
Yeah.
On that note, is there a thought process that there might be people who have had it and have recovered and have done it correctly? When you're speaking to your team, your age group, would it be worth asking that question? Has anyone had it, or would that just flare up more things?
Personally, I think no, and the only reason I say that is, as far as I'm aware, there's no scientific evidence that there's any immunity yet from having had it.
Yeah,
so I don't see that it would serve any purpose other than it might make us feel marginally better.
I'm just thinking of the scenario where your social distancing parents are talking on the sideline and going, "Oh, little Johnny had it 6 weeks ago," and everyone goes, "What the?" You know,
No,
I just want to make sure that we've not asked it for a reason, or we are asking it for a reason.
Yeah, no.
Rather hearsay, we do it down that road.
I think
paint a cross on their head, Mark. Just paint a cross on their head.
I think it's an
Take me
interesting
away! Infected!
Because I think there is something about, I don't know, obviously saying if you've been feeling poorly, don't come training until you're thoroughly well. Do we say if you've been poorly with COVID? Not necessarily. I think we have to use a bit of common sense.
Fair point.
People out. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't want to tire people that they've been infected and don't go anywhere near them. You just say, "I've got the plague, stay away from me."
Okay, I'm just conscious of time. Has anybody got any burning issues? I would say what we'll probably do, if people think this is worthwhile, is do a follow-up in a couple of weeks when people have reflected on changing guidance and maybe a few sessions have been underway and we can see how it's going. Does that sound a good idea?
All I was going to say is that my under 8s, 9s are going to have a little chat together and then feedback directly to you guys what our gut feel are as a vote. And off the back of that, you'll know what an age group is doing for the foreseeable up until at least a month. That's what we're planning on. It helps with your planning.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, under 11s have a Zoom meeting in half an hour, so we'll feedback as well.
Okay. All right. Cheers, guys.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks for the session.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Nice one, Doug. Thank you, mate.